Okay, so we are back. Hi, YouTube, indeed. We just finished our playthrough of Axiom Verge. So I'm going to go over things I like, things I didn't like, would I play it again, and general recommendations, I suppose, will be the topics covered in the final thoughts of the game. So from a standpoint of visuals, I think it's pretty good. It's very nice on the eyes, got that nice retro appeal. There's a couple areas where I felt like it was a little ambiguous what was the platform and what was the background, but I think other than that, it had some really strong contrasts between like the background and the floor, in particular the starting areas. I will say, if we're talking about strengths, I did really like the beginning areas a lot before you started getting a lot of the power-ups. I just feel like the flow, the level felt pretty good. Very mixed bag on the bosses. It's kind of fun to cheese exploit several of them, even from like a casual standpoint. It's not too hard to figure out some of the stuff, but man, if you don't understand the cheese gimmicks of some of the later bosses, I don't know. They go from kind of tanky to, man, they are just super high damaging and will just destroy you. So I think this might be a tough sell to a more casual audience, just because I would say the beginning of the game, if you're viewing this as kind of like a Metroid collectible or collectathon, where you go around, find power-ups that slowly change the way you approach the game, like with the address gun probably being the most unique and probably most cool, that would bring people in. Expecting people to get like grapple hook into teleports, into fast drone teleports, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of hard of a sell to get people into it. Like, for people that are interested in like a very technical game towards the end, or like kind of a speed game, I could kind of see it. But it's a lot harder to say, like, would the casual player really want to go through Disco Ball? I want to elaborate on that further in final thoughts. Like, for me, the answer to that is no. Most people would not want to go through those corridors. Yeah, the game definitely kind of played little tricks on us with what was breakable and not breakable. We were talking about this kind of through, like, kind of comparing it to very common games of the genre. So Metroid comes to mind. So while this game has a map, and it lets you place 2 markers on a map, but you have to be in the room, kind of neat, it misses all of those quality of life changes that later kind of collectathon games have. Like, easy example, like, if you think back to Super Metroid or even Fusion, there's always a little dot on the map if there's an item you could collect. And then in later games, the dot updates to designate you've collected it. And then in future games, it designates whether or not a door is locked. And then in the modern games, it tells you what specifically is locking you out of a particular check. So there's kind of like that progression of the map where it becomes more and more useful. So finding like the map is good. There is no finding of the map in this game, and the game will not tell you if there are secrets. In fact, there's a lot of secret areas we definitely missed, and I don't know if the game was balanced around you finding them, but I do feel like the difficulty at the beginning of the game is, you know, maybe slightly above average. Like, you might die, maybe. Like, there's enough save points placed throughout that it will be a mad dash to the save, but it is definitely possible to not really die that often. To the end of the game is like, you're gonna die a lot. Like, there's just, unless you have like super clean dash cancel stuff into drone, like, you're just gonna take so much damage and die. Like, there's just not really, it's not really like a lot around it. I like that there's different ways to interact with the enemy, and I think that was probably the best part and appeal of the game, is the address gun and all of its other mini upgrades, where it's not something that damages an enemy but causes their functionality to change. So you could use them to, for example, act as platforms, or you disable their attacks, or they're more likely to generate health. And I really like that. I think when it was playing to that kind of thing, the game did super well from a casual standpoint. And that was like very appealing, where it's like, wow, this really annoying enemy that's hard to kill suddenly is a health dispenser. And that's like, wow, what a relief when you get to that part of the game. So Now that I've been able to tell you roughly how many items are left in each area, maybe, but that would require backtracking. I don't know about that. We're listening to the soundtrack at the moment. I think that's also one of the strong suits of the game. I do like the art style. The story's not bad. It does actually has a sizable story. It has a lot of collectible journals. It has a number of cutscenes. It's got like an okay plot twist if you haven't seen the game before. It's enough, you know, it pulls you in. It's not, you know, some work of art, you know, you're just getting like 2-hour movie kind of thing, but it's enough to keep you invested in the world. And I think the style of the now I forget their names, I feel really bad, but the giant creatures you come across and talk to that look like giant heads, I really like that H.R. Geiger kind of look to basically all of the background art as well as them in particular. So it's kind of a mix of an interesting surreal horror. I will say I have a favorite section of the game, but even naming it would be a spoiler. But it involves a play on expectations involving the pathogen, and I won't go any further than that. That was probably my favorite thing in the whole game, in terms of like, wow, that's really trippy. And I just like how that whole floor was designed, and I like revisiting it after you get through the gimmick of that particular area. The soundtrack was quite good, aside, yeah. So I think it's really cool, especially for the first time through, yeah. I won't go into too many spoilers, but yeah, the hands were really good. So I will say it's interesting. I think where the game is flawed from a casual standpoint, I don't know if things like the speedrun mode or the randomizer fix these things, but there are just kind of 1 or 2 weapons that completely invalidate half of the other upgrades you get. So unlike in something like a Metroid where you progressively improve a single weapon, like your normal beam becomes ice beam, becomes charge ice beam, becomes wave ice, whatever. This one, it separates them out into functions. So you got like your basic shooter, you got like a widespread lightning strike attack, you got a close range wall piercing attack, and you got a few other ones, but honestly, outside of like a couple puzzles, there's really not a lot of reason to use more than 2 weapons. Like, we found ourselves using the full screen lightning a lot and the close range lightning, and we bothered with nothing else after a certain part of the game, which I think is definitely a shame, because the early bosses, you know, we did use like a different weapon or at least different tactics where feasibly those weapons would be usable. Like, I could see it. But towards the end of the game, it's just like, just use this one ability. Like, there's nothing there. The other ones don't even come remotely close in terms of damage. I kind of had mixed feelings. Like, after you get like a whole bunch of weapon power-ups and solid health upgrades, it kind of trickle feeds you midway through the game. Like, once you've gotten like 5 or 6 weapons, you are kind of getting like parts of health upgrades and parts of damage upgrades. And honestly, I didn't really care about the range extension upgrade, like, at all. The only thing I would have liked it on was the short range lightning. I mean, it made like our drill really big, for example, but the drill doesn't really do a lot of damage. Like, you're still not gonna main drill. You might alternate it with something else. I don't know. It just seemed kind of pointless to me. Something like Ratchet & Clank has so many weapons that are effective for different things. Yeah, like, the game kind of does it. Like, it tries to put weaknesses in weird areas so that, like, you can't just hit them straight on. So maybe if you have, like, a ricochet gun or something that goes under the boss, it will hit that weakness. Like, there is a little thought there. But in practice, that's not how you can beat most of the bosses. Yeah, that close range lightning, aka Kilver, which Christopher mentions, is just, it's so good. There's just no reason to bother using anything else. In particular, when you combine it with the fact that enemies are fairly aggressive, they go pretty quickly, and they will chase you. So, range is not really a problem if they're always near you. So, all the downsides of the weapon are basically 0. Because the time it would take for you to hit 2 to 3 times with other weapons, that's as much as Kilver does already. So it doesn't really matter. So, I mean, it's killing its name, of course, the most deadly weapon, yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't get to play with the bonus weapons at all. Just never found them in the playthrough. I am aware of them. I will state for people looking to play the game, if they did find it interesting, as I said before, the speedrun mode and the randomizer built into the game is very interesting. So for people looking for that kind of thing, where they like a lot of more technical movement, maybe not as insane technical movement as like Super Metroid, as demanding every single jump, like for example, but towards the end of the game, it does get a little tricky. But I will say, don't play with VSync. I had a playthrough prior to the stream many years ago, and VSync absolutely ruined my gaming experience. So if you do want to play this game, VSync goes off. You do not want to experience damage bugs where you do less damage and you also take more damage. It is horrendous. It's like playing on hard mode, except you could also be on hard mode and then it becomes impossible mode. Like, it just, I don't recommend it at all. So game time wise, the first playthrough completely blind with the VSync on was like 10 hours. Comparatively, like 6 years later, it was like 6.5. I mean, we did cut down the game time by quite a bit. We could definitely have done a lot better. I feel like an issue with this game in particular, where it's a little harder for me to want to go back to it in particular, is that there's not really like a fast warp system. Like, for example, normally there's something that kind of shortcuts you through a level, whether it's like a area to speed boost in Metroid, or in Castlevania there's warps. So a few times where I kind of dead-ended because I didn't know what it wanted for like side items, I had to go like all the way back, and that was like an 8-minute plus trek to go back to plot. It was kind of horrendous. Like, granted, that time went down as you got more mobility, but it still felt kind of bad throughout. And I do feel like there's a couple times where it is pretty easy to forget to do certain things, and you can end up losing a lot of time looking for that one possible path. I will say, from like a kind of mixed bag, it is very interesting. You could phase through walls, but trying to remember to do that in order to get items and remember where certain walls were, not as fun. Like, I really like it in concept, but in execution, mixed bag. There were parts of it where I thought it was cool, where you got to revisit areas you've been to before, but you could take little shortcuts in the room because you have new tools, and I think that part of the game was pretty well designed, but those final couple levels, they're like, yeah, if the difficulty was at like 5.5, we're gonna put it on like 7.5. I'm like, oh, did you not collect every health upgrade? Put it to 9. Just put it at 9. I could not imagine going through that final area without all the health upgrades that I had. Like, that honestly seemed abysmal. So power to Chrysogrim and people that also speedrun the game / play the randomizer and only get like 1 health node, as that honestly just seems nightmarish. I personally would not want to play it on that kind of difficulty, but maybe to some people it appeals. So I'm just gathering my final thoughts, but chat, if you want to say anything else about the game you feel we haven't talked about, or just want to say something in general about the game, for or against it, now is definitely your time. In terms of expectations, I will state, I generally had fun with the game. I would say if you're looking for a slightly harder Metroidvania and you want to see some really interesting takes on the genre, I think this game is definitely worth picking up. If you like kind of a more casual playthrough, or you like the comfort factor of having like reserve tanks in a Metroid game, like the older style Metroid games, I don't know if this will be the game for you. Honestly, it's kind of difficult at points. Like, we have a lot of experience cheesing bosses from outside game experience, and I don't know if casual players would know to do some of the things that we were doing. So even Even bosses like the one where it pulls back and it takes up the full screen, which I will state is a really cool concept. That boss can also be, I could see a casual roadblock for sure. Chris in the chat says, think the game was decent overall. Very Metroid, not sure if it's my thing or not. Had some good aspects to it, also seems kind of rough. Yeah, there's definitely some roughness to it. We were apparently missing some tech involving the grapple hook. I will state the grapple hook was like so close to being fun, but for me it like just missed the bar. There's certain things about it I really don't like that if they had tweaked it just a little bit and not done anything else with the physics, I would have liked it from a casual standpoint. So like, I'll give an example. In things like Castlevania 4 or Super Metroid, if you grapple onto something, you do not let go until you let go of the button. But in this game, if you hold too far to the left or to the right, you automatically let go, which is like good if you want to climb along the ceiling, which does happen in a few sections of the game. But when it comes to like speed platforming, it suddenly becomes a lot harder for the casual player because you're like, oh, you're gonna zip up, you're gonna start, you're trying to build momentum, so you hold right and oops, it let go, and then like the punishment factor, I think combined with the punishment factor of you missing one grapple hook jump in the mid game to late game is so punishing compared to a lot of other games, and that's where I find it to be a really hard sell. Like for example, we've missed one grapple jump and I lost half my health in several points in our playthrough, in particular at the end of the game, but even in the midpoint of the game, like suddenly I just lost almost 40 seconds of progress because I plummet 6 or 7 platforms down and now I'm 2 tiles down and I have to loop all the way around just for another chance at it. Kind of brutal. I will say it's better to have that than insta death spikes. I'm really happy there was no insta death. I know that is also a big turnoff for people when they encounter that. So instead, every enemy just does a lot of damage. So expect to die usually between 4 to 6 hits pretty much at all points of the game. Now, if you're backtracking and you have, you know, your quote-unquote suit equivalent upgrades, it'd probably take maybe double that amount with the extra life, but yeah, not a lot of leeway and no ways to refill. So you got a hard commit. I will say from the standpoint of speeding things up, I did appreciate how fast it was to quit to menu. So for example, if you save, you find a dead end, you could just return to menu and then immediately jump back into the game. There's like a slight animation for restarting the character, and suddenly you don't have to backtrack like 7 hallways. It kind of reminds me of like what Dissonance did, aka the only one of the only things I liked about Dissonance when we played it. But in terms of playability, would I play it again? I'm on the fence. I don't know if a randomizer would solve things for me. I feel like it would make certain parts of the game very hard. And as I said before, I can't imagine the end game area harder. I just, nothing about that feels appealing to me. So I would have to really think about if I were to personally pick it up and try it again. Would I speedrun it? Probably not. I don't feel like I have the personal execution in order to do well in those kinds of things. So from a casual standpoint, would I go back and try to find every item with a guide? Maybe. I'm not that kind of player though. I like to be very thorough with RPGs, but when it comes to action games, like I just want to get up and go, right? And I feel like I'm not quite at that level of performance to enjoy it for that kind of thing, where I felt I really had to slow down my gameplay in like the last 2 levels in particular, which is very counter to how I like to play the game. So skill issue, not a game issue, that's a skill issue, but ultimately that still factors into my own enjoyment of it. So for me, I probably will not pick it up again, honestly speaking. I definitely have no interest in racing it, for sure. Does that make it a bad race game? Absolutely not. I highly encourage for people, as I said before, that are willing to do a lot of really quick motions with teleports and also the swap places. It's got a lot going on with it towards the end. I don't know how much of it you would see at once in a randomizer, but it's very interesting how you would clear a room with different relics. or the equivalency thereof. But I think for now, I don't have anything else to really say about the game. Probably give the soundtrack a listen again. I think there are certain aspects of it that are very enjoyable. As I said before, I really feel like the first half of the game is like super solid. And had I only played like a 3-hour preview and given a review of the game, I would have said like absolutely yes. When I get to the 6-hour mark of the playthrough, I'm like absolutely on the fence. It just doesn't feel quite the same. It doesn't feel as like smoothed out, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of difficulty for the end game. It's definitely meant for people that are very comfortable with every single mechanic, not just a couple, but like every single mechanic. And I don't feel like I got there in a single playthrough, and I'm not sure I ever will at this rate. But in any case, yeah, very adaptive routing for sure. So if it at all piqued your interest in terms of if you'd watch a trailer for it, or maybe you saw a little bit of the gameplay earlier, I would say give it a shot. But just be forewarned, you're in for a more challenging game towards the end, for sure. So I think with that, that concludes the final thoughts of the game. So hopefully if you got to this point in the video, you enjoyed what you listened to. I'm seeing chat saying there's something player we need to practice luck. Keep that VSync off. Great reminder, Christogram, right before we sign off with the video. Yeah, it's definitely a game that is very demanding, and you know, some people like that kind of game, some people don't. I'm on the fence about it. I think it was worth playing and worth showing off, so I have no regrets from that nature. But in terms of the video, we're gonna say goodbye to YouTube again, and hope to see you again next time.